So our first section of the meeting is just a broad Toastmasters 101. I'm going to cover what the mission of Toastmasters is, which is hopefully why you joined in the first place and truly the power of Toastmasters. Then we're going to talk about meeting roles and what each of those roles require and a couple of best practices for each. We'll move through those pretty quickly. And then we'll move through the meeting flow pro tips. And just a little disclaimer on this, some of the tips that I cover in the meeting flow are focused on in-person meetings. I know everyone has a different experience right now, whether it's all virtual, part virtual, or all in person. It's a broad range right now, depending on your club situation. But I want to make sure I cover some of those meeting flow etiquette tips for in person. That way, when we return to in person and the experienced Toastmasters do all of these things automatically, and you're like, whoa, 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 we did not walk up and stand up all the time when we were online. What is happening here? I want to make sure you're fully prepared for when that does happen. And then lastly, in this first segment, we'll also go over some of the club resources that should be available to you within your club so that you know where to get help and ask questions and get more information after this workshop, because I can do a lot of talking in an hour and a half or so, but not quite that much where I cover everything. So you will have questions, you will need more help, and your club will be there to support you after that. So with that, are we ready to go? Let me know in the chat or with a thumbs up or something. You're all with me and we're ready to get started. All right, thank you guys so much. Just gonna start my presentation here and share my screen. If Julie can let me.
Yes, sorry about that.
No worries.
Let me make you a co-host real quick. Okay, Danielle now has full rights.
Perfect. All right. Can you guys see this dark screen with Toastmasters 101 on it? I see some nods. All right, we're in the clear. So Toastmasters 101, welcome to Toastmasters if you're new, welcome back if you're returning, and thanks for staying if you've been here a long time and are just trucking along with us. I want to quickly go over just a brief introduction to Toastmasters for the brand new people here. For Toastmasters International, the mission is to empower individuals to become more effective communicators and leaders. And I emphasize this because we see this as a public speaking club. Typically, that's how we talk about it, but it really focuses on both of those cornerstones, communication and leadership. And I'm going to talk about how the different meeting roles and the different pathways opportunities really try to push you in both of those directions, depending on what you want to get out of your Toastmasters experience the most. Now, the core values of Toastmasters are respect, integrity, service, and excellence. You should have been reminded of this on your application when you originally joined Toastmasters and or in the Toastmasters promise. But these are good things to remember as you are interacting in your Toastmasters clubs. And some fun facts to know about Toastmasters that you might not know is we do have over 300,000 members in over 15,000 clubs in 149 countries. So what I love about Toastmasters is that it has this global impact, a huge spread across the world, but it has that feeling of family when you're in your club. You get that intimacy of interacting with your fellow members in that club meeting, but you have the support and the resources of this huge 100,000s membership behind you. All right. Oh, we skipped ahead a little bit. But now we will jump into our meeting roles. So the first and foremost is the role of Toastmaster. This is the one that you should all be familiar with, which is essentially the host of the meeting. If this were a traditional club meeting, we would say that I was probably the Toastmaster, and Julie might be considered the Sergeant at Arms, just based on what her role is, which we'll cover towards the end here. And the role of the Toastmaster as the host of the meeting, one of the things I love about it is that it has these small practices of communication, but it also is a really great leadership role to practice, because on the one side with communication, you're practicing the ability to transition smoothly from person to person, from meeting portion to meeting portion. That way, if you were in, let's say, a work meeting, it can be a lot easier to communicate between people, to delegate between people, and help moderate a conversation. But what I love also is that it gives you an opportunity to practice your leadership skills. As the Toastmaster, it's your job to make sure that all of your helpers or functionaries or meeting roles are prepared for the meeting, and to make sure all the participants are as prepared as possible for the meeting. So you're responsible for setting the agenda, making sure people have the agenda ahead of time, making sure people have the information that they need to do their roles. For instance, if a grammarian wants to choose a word of the day that goes with your theme, you want to make sure you communicate that theme well in advance to make sure everyone is prepared ahead of time. Another role that can be impacted by this is the table topics master. If they're going to craft a table topic segment that truly fits in line with your theme, you need to make sure you communicate well in advance. Now, it's also your responsibility as Toastmaster to help do any of that coordination that may happen if meetings get overbooked, or people unfortunately can't make meetings, or they want to unexpectedly volunteer for different roles. You'll want to help manage those transitions and making sure that all roles are filled at the start of the meeting, and that everything can run smoothly as soon as you gavel it in, or whatever the virtual equivalent is of gaveling in the meeting. And then obviously, you know the basics of Toastmaster, that during the meeting, you want to host it smoothly. You want to make yourself almost as little noticeable as possible for a Toastmasters meeting. In other scenarios, the Toastmaster or host role, you can have a little more flair, you can add some energy and make it more fun. But for a Toastmasters meeting, what makes a Toastmaster strong is when everything goes so smoothly, you hardly even know what they did. They make it look so easy. And that's what makes a really strong Toastmaster effective. All right, in our resources that I know Julie and I can share with you after this workshop, I will have a Toastmasters script worksheet. This can be really helpful for our newest members. And the idea for this is so that all of the new members who look at the Toastmaster role and think that is scary, I am never signing up for that by choice. This should help you and gives you a brief script to work through as you go through the meeting, but it keeps it pretty open-ended, so you can fill in different sections or move things around if you need to, depending on how your club meeting works or varies. Next, we have Table Topics Master. One of my favorite roles, because usually this means you're not answering table topics, you're hosting them. So that kind of gives you a pass. Obviously, the basics is that a table topics master will create a list of questions or prompts that coincide with the theme of the meeting. And the idea is to generate that on-the-cuff, impromptu speaking practice for the people who are participating. A few best practices and suggestions. One of them is lead the discussion with confidence. As Table Topics Master, you kind of have this sub-leadership role within the Toastmaster umbrella, because that section of the meeting is yours to run. In a traditional in-person meeting, you would step up to the front of the room and you would then be commanding that room as necessary for that portion of the meeting. It's your job to transition from person to person, whether they volunteer or you select them. And you want to make sure you read off your questions or prompts or present whatever it is you're doing for table topics with confidence and clarity. Another best practice or suggestion is to prepare to volunteer people when necessary. I strongly encourage this for table topics because why didn't we sign up for Toastmasters if not to get a little outside of our comfort zones? And when you're the table topics master, you make the rules for the day. So if you decide you want to call on people to answer those questions or respond to those prompts, I say you have the ability to do so. And then lastly is get creative. There is the traditional format of just a Q&A style of table topics, but there are a lot of ways that you can make this more varied, fun, or just add a little bit more of your personality into that table topics portion. Another one of the resources that I'll share with you guys is this 10 creative ways to lead table topics one sheet. And it just gives you some fun ideas. You obviously don't have to use these exactly, but they might even inspire some other ways that you can make table topics more creative and interesting. One of the things that I really liked is the choose your own adventure, which is number 3 on this sheet. And I did this for my club where I created questions that build on each other, and based on the answers people gave, that would lead me to the next question. So they would decide, I think it was Game of Thrones theme, and they had to decide who they were killing in the family, and there was drama and murder, and it was a great time. And at the end, we had created this entire story together out of the table topics responses, and it was really fun. Being a writer and a storyteller myself, that was how I wanted to infuse a little bit of me into that table topic session and make it a little more creative. Next, we have general evaluator. I like to have this one next because it's another kind of sub Toastmaster role. Typically in meetings, your general evaluator is leading the portion of the meeting that focuses on evaluation and feedback. So yes, the general evaluator's responsibility is to evaluate the meeting as a whole, and you give a 2 to 3 minute oral presentation of your thoughts and feedback at the end of the meeting, but you also have this leadership opportunity. Essentially, all of the functionary roles like the speech evaluator, timer, grammarian, they're within your umbrella. They are a part of your team, and you want to make sure, just like with the Toastmaster, that your team is as prepared as possible, that they feel well equipped to fulfill their roles, and that they feel confident in what they're supposed to do during that reporting segment of the meeting. It can be a tough spot to manage if you're not used to the meeting flow, which is why we're going to run through the meeting flow a little bit later. And there are some great resources on YouTube as well from Toastmasters, just about how a typical meeting should operate. And then, as you know, the most basic responsibility of the general evaluator is to evaluate the meeting. And like Julie said earlier, I do think evaluation is one of the most powerful tools of Toastmasters because it's so well infused into our Toastmasters journey. It's a part of everything that we do, both the meetings and our curriculum. And the last thing I want to say about the general evaluator role is that it also is an opportunity to practice giving feedback that maybe you're not used to giving. I don't know about you, but I can critique someone's speech all day long because I feel like I have a rubric to follow. I have either their project guideline or I have just some basics that I know are things we should do and things we shouldn't, and I try to make suggestions on those. But when it comes to critiquing the way someone presented table topics, the way someone held themselves and introduced a theme as the host of a meeting, those are really interesting things to evaluate and challenge you to look for ways for people to better practice in those different roles outside of just giving a prepared speech. Next, we have speech evaluator. This is obviously the responsibility is to evaluate the main speaker of the day, or if you have two speakers, then you would have two speech evaluators. And I have a whole workshop on just evaluating someone effectively. But what I mostly recommend are three things to focus on in your evaluation of a speech. I always recommend that you focus on what you see, what you hear, and what you feel. As long as you focus on those three things and try to make sure you're sharing your personal observations, that makes for a very strong evaluation. Now, a lot of people also typically recommend the sandwich method. For instance, making sure you mention something positive both before and after you mention a criticism that might be harder to hear. Of course, that is a great method, but that's more about the structure of an evaluation in that 2 to 3 minutes. I want to make sure you're really grasping that the speech evaluation, the execution of that role, is about you. It's about what you are observing. And I say this because people tend to be afraid of being a speech evaluator, especially newer members, because you feel like you haven't been in Toastmasters long enough, you don't know the rules, you didn't learn anything in Pathways yet. Who are you to be critiquing anyone else who's speaking? You feel like you're just a newborn babe, you have nothing of value to add, but that is completely untrue. What's important is your personal observations. You can say something like, I had a hard time following you because of such and such. Is it because they weren't looking at the camera? Is it because they were talking too fast? Is it because they were looking down and reading this whole time and it was too soft? Maybe that's why. But the point is that you're focusing on your personal experiences. Try to capture that all times in your evaluation. And it doesn't matter how experienced or inexperienced you are, you will always have something of value to say to that speaker. All right, next we have our functionaries, our counter, grammarian, and timer. What you see here on the screen are actually screenshots from the Toastmasters app. If you don't use it, I recommend using it. It's a great way to not only just be able to time people and count ahs and ums while people are speaking and track use of the word of the day for grammarian, but they also are a great way to log all of that information in the app, and it associates it with you and your club. That way people can any member can log into that app and look at a record of how they did. So it's really helpful, especially for instance, the counter role. If you are tallying things in there and then the next person who's counter also tallies in that same app, then, Megan can go in the app later and see, hey, on October 1st, I had 20 ums, but then on October 8th, I only had 10. So that's clear improvement. So I love that the app makes it really useful. I also have some worksheets that are really helpful for in-person meetings. I know we don't usually use print as much anymore with virtual meetings, but they can be really helpful to help tally or keep track of the things that you're doing in these functionary roles. Before I move on from this slide, I just want to double check. Does anyone have specific questions about the grammarian, counter, and timer roles? And Julie, just if you see anything in the chat window, if you can let me know.
I don't, but what is the name of the app in case we would like to download it?
I think it's just called Toastmasters, but I can double check right now for you, Julie.
Just to make sure we get the right Toastmasters app.
I just downloaded it. It's Toastmasters International.
Yes,
Perfect.
There you go.
Thank you so
Making
much. Sure that we get the right one out there, Danielle.
Yes, here it is. Toastmasters International. You can even see one of the same screenshots I have up here. That shows you're in the right place. All right, any other questions that came in about these roles?
I do not see any. That means you are doing a fantastic job, or maybe we're a little quiet tonight.
Either way, when you have more questions, you can go ask your club officers and they will help you. Or you can always ask me and Julie, of course. All right, so we have grammarian, as you know, is responsible for choosing the word of the day and also evaluating the use of the English language during the meeting. Again, the app is really helpful to be able to track your notes about use of the word of the day or about comments on their use of the English language. This is another one that I think newer members tend to struggle with, or members whose native language is not English. You might feel intimidated by this role, but I just want to encourage you to make it your own. There are no standards and no hard and fast rules here in Toastmasters. Every role is an opportunity to practice. So just take a look at this role as an opportunity for you to practice your own grammar, your vocabulary, etc., and use that evaluation, I guess, angle as a way to practice. Keep an eye out for the things that maybe you yourself don't feel as strong in and see if that improves your recognition of them and your awareness, and just find ways to make it your own. I have many a co-club member who have solely focused on just cool phrases people said, and that's all they talked about in their report. And those were some of the best grammarian reports we ever got. So this is a great opportunity to practice your listening skills and your critical thinking skills along with the basics of grammar. Next, we have a counter, our favorite, tallying those ahs, ums, and other filler words and sounds. I'm just saying it as an example. That was completely for your benefit. And as you know, the ah counter role is to tally those up, keep track of them, and make sure to give a report at the end of the meeting. I don't have any specific best practices besides pay attention, make sure you listen carefully, and don't get too caught up in the amazing things people are saying that you forget to possibly mark some of those things down. I know that can be a common hiccup, especially for our new members who can be enamored with some of our amazing speakers. And you're right, they may be truly fantastic, but we still want to catch them. So make sure you listen carefully. I also will point out for this one that not everyone's filler words or sounds are the same. So the ums and ahs and the extra conjunctions like and, but, or so are pretty common ones that we typically track and notice. But there are also, you might catch onto unique filler words and sounds that different members use. That's just like a little quirk of theirs. I originally joined Toastmasters with my dad, and boy, did I have the privilege to catch him on things that people did not notice. But here I grew up with him, so I knew that was a crutch word or phrase that he was leaning on more than necessary. And it was really fascinating to start pointing those out in front of 20 to 30 other people at his workplace. What a time. All right. And oh, here we go. We talked about all of these things already. For in-person meetings, there is this option of using a buzzer or a bell, or even the app actually allows you to have a sound if you want to. This is probably way too disruptive for virtual meetings, so I wouldn't recommend it because people would just be confused and think someone's phone was going off. But in-person meetings, this has been a really effective tool for my club specifically, and it may sound really scary if you haven't done it before, but I assure you that it is effective despite being rather aggressive. All right, last but not least, we have the timer role. And as you all know, the timer's responsibility is to track time for our prepared speeches, our table topics responses, our table topic speakers, and our evaluators. So the timings typically are as follows, and you can find this in anywhere on Toastmasters or in any other Toastmasters resource, so you can refer to it again later. But typically for an icebreaker speech, which is the first speech anyone gives for a new start on Pathways, is 4 to 6 minutes. For standard prepared speeches, they are 5 to 7 minutes. but I do always recommend confirming this with the speaker to make sure they don't have a different kind of project that sometimes allocates for 8 to 10 minutes, 11 to 15, or some other weird range. Table topics is 1 to 2 minutes, and for evaluations, you want to make sure you time them from 2 to 3 minutes. Now, typically, you'll have those green, yellow, and red signals. At my club, we use virtual backgrounds. That way we can just change the entire background on our screen to green, yellow, or red. You might do something like this, or I think when we first started virtual meetings, we didn't quite have the virtual background thing down yet. So we grabbed cracker boxes and note cards and Post-its and whatever we could find that seemed kind of red, yellow, and green, and we used those. So whatever works for you, as long as you have those signals available. And typically we do the green signal at the start of that range for the time, and then the yellow signal at halfway, and then the red signal at the end of their time frame. This is also a good thing to confirm with your speakers, because some speakers might want to adjust that, especially for the longer speeches. So if someone has something like 11 to 15 minutes, maybe they don't want the green signal at 11 minutes. Maybe they would prefer it at 13 minutes. Or maybe they want it at 9 minutes and a red one at 12 minutes. You want to make sure that you're catering it to them a little bit on those custom projects. But in general, this is a good rule of thumb to follow. All right, now we get to jump into meeting flow pro tips. And I know this picture looks frightening because they are not 6 feet apart and they're shaking hands and their mouths are all open without masks. And it's just devastating. What a time to be alive. But like I mentioned in the beginning, I do want to make sure I cover some of those in-person meeting flow etiquette tips so that when we are all in person full time again one day, you are fully prepared for what to expect in a Toastmasters meeting, especially if you're new. One thing is that the lectern is like a baby in a bathtub, which means what? You never leave it unattended, never at all. Now, obviously, there will be no death if you leave the lectern unattended, and everything will be safe and just continue on. But that is the best rule of thumb to follow when you are in person and you have a dedicated area, aka lectern, where someone is hosting the meeting from. This is really important to remember as a Toastmaster or table topics master when it's your job to transition from person to person. You always want to make sure you aren't stepping away from that podium or lectern until someone else is assuming that same position, assuming that conduct of the meeting. This is one of those things that if done well, no one ever notices it. It doesn't affect anything in the meeting. But if it's done poorly and people are just abandoning the front of the room and people are late walking up and there's awkward transitions and things like that, that's when people notice them and might feel like the meeting or the event is getting a little chaotic or out of hand. So it's just a good smoothing tip to keep in mind in those roles. Going hand in hand with that, always transition with the handshake. Again, this is a Toastmasters rule of thumb for Toastmasters meetings. Who knows if this will stay and how much it will stay? I know some clubs have gone to more of the bow, and we used to do that as well when anyone had a cold in the office or something, that we would just tap our elbows instead of a full handshake. But the handshake is the more professional transition to always do at that lectern. Lead the applause after every speaker. I really hope that people are still doing this in virtual meetings. I strongly encourage it in my club, but this is really important for the Toastmaster to remember, or anyone who has a meeting role in the meeting, that you want to make sure you lead the applause. And one thing to keep in mind with this is, first of all, the speaker shouldn't lead their own applause, so they kind of need some help there. But also your guests who have never been to a Toastmasters meeting before aren't going to know when to clap and when not to clap and when to give a standing ovation and when to not. So you, as a Toastmaster and someone who's filling a role in the meeting, want to make sure that you lead that right off. Do it with confidence, do it with pizzazz, whatever it is, make sure you are clapping. And this one I find fun, which is accept the applause when you are the speaker. This applies especially for in-person meetings and events where people clap for us and we just want to run away. We want to run away from that podium. We want to pretend like we were never up there. You never saw me. This never happened. I'm just going to sit down and you never have to look at me again. Great. I want to challenge you as Toastmasters to make sure you are accepting that applause. Receive it. If you're in person, you would receive it until that Toastmaster comes back up to take that baby in the bathtub away from you and make sure that you can go back to your seat. But also, this is a great way to leave a lasting confident note with your audience as a speaker. If you watch TEDx speakers or even the professional speakers at our Toastmasters competitions, you see that they finished strong. They stand there until it is time for them to walk off and they don't run away for anyone. So this is an important skill to make sure we're practicing. Next, again, for in-person meetings, we would typically recommend you always stand to deliver your report as a functionary. So for grammarian, all counter, timer, all of those, you would want to stand where you are. And of course, try to overcome nervousness and build confidence as you use all of these meeting roles as opportunities to practice. And with that, we'll jump into the very tail end of this segment, which is just about your club, how your club should be helping you, and some resources to look out for if you have more questions after today, or if you've just forgotten everything I've said and want help outside of asking me. These are the people that you can ask. So to start, your club's mission, every club has the same mission. We provide a supportive and positive learning experience in which members are empowered to develop communication and leadership skills, resulting in greater self-confidence and personal growth. Now, this is a mouthful, which is why I highlighted some words. We have supportive and positive. Please make sure that your club is a supportive and positive environment. Make sure it is based on how you are behaving, and make sure it is for you based on how others are behaving. Next, communication and leadership skills. Again, this is where I always like to emphasize that, yes, it's about practicing public speaking skills, but it's also a great place to practice leadership and experiment with your leadership skills in a safe environment. And then last but not least, the heart of it all is for you to grow in self-confidence and personal growth. So make sure that your goals with Toastmasters are at the heart of everything you do, and that you are getting what you want and what you need out of Toastmasters. Now, the resources I mentioned, these are a few officers to keep in mind. If you're brand new, you probably talk to these people, but you might not have associated them with their titles yet. So just keep these in mind as you are looking for answers and you aren't sure who to go to. Your Vice President of Education is responsible for managing the education of your members in the club. So this is the person when I'm not around to go to for questions on pathways, on your curriculum in general, on your transcript, how to get education awards, and anything associated with your goals. Your Vice President of Membership is responsible for managing the membership of the club and making sure that everyone is satisfied, happy, fulfilled, engaged with the club. It's essentially like the COO or president of a company. They're the ones managing that club culture and making sure, again, that you're accomplishing your goals, but maybe on a less tangible or metrics focused way. And then, of course, your president is the go-to. If they don't have the answer, they will find someone who does, or they will find the answer for you. So find out who the president is if you don't know already, and make sure that you know where to go for those questions. Next is mentoring. If your club does not have a mentorship program, then definitely talk to Julie after this meeting or after this workshop and let her know and see if she can put you in touch with a mentorship expert at the district who can help you get it started. But if you do have a mentorship program set up, make sure that you link up with a mentor. Express interest in having a mentor to your vice president of membership and vice president of education, and see what you can do to get the wheels turning, because a mentorship is a really strong tool in Toastmasters. And then, like I said, by all means, ask Founders District for help to set up a mentoring program if there isn't one already in your club. All right. For the first segment, I would love to take a brief moment to answer any questions you have on things that we covered or things that we didn't before we jump into the Pathways tutorial.
Don't be shy. Danielle's waiting for your questions. This is your opportunity. Now, granted, of course, you can ask us later, but
you can ask us later.
I know we have some really new members. Like, what is the one thing that you're really wishing that you would like to know about Toastmasters?
How did it get started? Like, what, I mean, it's been around for a long time, but like, what is its history?
Yeah, so Dr. Ralph Smedley started Toastmasters at the YMCA in Santa Ana. And it was originally started to help young men become better speakers and better leaders. Of course, we've evolved over time, and eventually women were allowed to join. And over time, the education program has evolved as well. We ditched those paper manuals and we're now all electronic, and we have the pathway system. But it started right here in Southern California in Santa Ana. Founders District is the birthplace of Toastmasters International. Fun fact, we're not the oldest district. We split from District 1. We both wanted to be the District 1, because who does not want to be District 1, the birthplace? And so it was decided that District 1 would be District 1, and we would be Founders District, and we're the only district in the world that does not have a number for our district. But yeah, over time, it's expanded to different countries. The first club outside of the United States was in Canada. I think the first club outside of here in Southern California was in Washington, I believe. So it's been great to watch. You know, obviously, I didn't watch those first ones expand, but I do know that the program, especially in emerging markets, is very popular because it helps people with their careers.
There were a couple of postings earlier asking about, evaluations and how club meetings work. Do you feel like you've got your questions answered, or were there specific things that you wanted to know that we didn't cover? Looks like that was Katie, which I just saw you nodding. And
maybe our seasoned Toastmasters on our meeting tonight could share what is the one thing that you wish when you joined Toastmasters that someone has told you, or what is your best tip?
I do have a question, not a tip because I'm not seasoned. But like the Toastmasters meetings that I've been to, whenever like evaluators are giving feedback, it tends to be like generally positive. And I joined because I have to do some like pretty high level speaking, and I would want like, not necessarily just positive feedback, but like real critical feedback. So how would I ask for that in a way that doesn't seem negative?
That is a really good question. I guess it depends on your group, because I tend to be someone who's very direct and I'm not afraid to say, give me something harder, give me something more to work on. But I realize that not everyone can take that quite as well. I just happen to be very close with my group, so I feel comfortable enough to do that. Do you feel like there are a couple of people in specific that maybe you've latched onto or been closer to, or if you do have a mentor or someone that you could talk to about it, like in more private?
No, and like I said, I'm very new to the group, so, and it's all virtual, so there's like no interaction outside of like the time that we have during the meeting. I mean, like I could always reach out to someone directly, but you know, like outside of like in the comments during the meeting, like there's not a lot of opportunity to connect.
One of
Yeah.
the things that you can also do is let your club know, I'm really working on this, for my professional. And so I want that honest feedback, not just, especially I think sometimes when we get our new members, like we try to give them that very positive, to be that encouraging, because we all remember how tough it was. But if you let them know, hey, I'm really looking for that, how can I improve that nitty gritty, if I am not making eye contact, or if I'm not smiling, or, whatever it may be that they noticed, maybe those little tics that you have, let your club know as well. And you can always, typically in a club, you'll notice that there's some people that are really great speakers, and you can reach out to them after. I know we're all on Zoom, but you know what the great thing about Zoom is, you can jump on Zoom at any time, a day or night. Obviously it has to work for both people, but I do find that I'm actually more available because I can just pop into a meeting and you can talk about it. And so I think that's maybe one of the things, is look for maybe somebody that you really like their speaking style when they speak, and you can ask them, or you can also let the group know in advance. Ask your evaluator or your Toastmaster of the day, whoever introduces you, to include that in your introduction, that you want that incredibly honest feedback, to the point of just be mean to me, or not mean, but you'll be very, very constructive with that feedback.
Yeah, a couple of other ways that I think you could do it is also, if you volunteer to be the general evaluator, that's always a constructive criticism you could give to the evaluators of the day. Not to be passive aggressive about it, but that's certainly an approach. And especially if this is like a club-wide issue, then it's something everyone should hear. And you can even bring that up in your general evaluation of like, I feel like we do a great job really supporting each other and being really positive, but I would love for us to be a little bit more critical, since these are all opportunities to practice and we're really here to learn and grow. I want to make sure we're really growing as opposed to just plateauing or staying where we're at. So that might be an opportunity to bring something up in like a safe environment where you're not calling anybody out, but you can bring it to their attention. And then another thing is reaching out to your vice president of education. So if you didn't have anyone already that you were kind of connecting with, I might reach out to them specifically and just express what you're saying, that you really want to look for harsher feedback, for lack of a better word, to make sure that you're growing in your professional abilities, because it's really their goal to make sure that you're meeting your goals. And so if you're not, then they'll want to do something about that, even if it's just, giving you harsher feedback or something. So they might be able to brainstorm some ways too. Any other questions about meeting flow, meeting rules? Oh, you know what, Judy, you posted one in private that I just want to answer for the group as well. You asked, what does the sergeant at arms do? Because I mentioned how Julie is kind of like the sergeant at arms for the meeting. I'm assuming that's why that one came up. And that's a great question. So the sergeant at arms is actually a club officer role, just like the president and VP of membership. Their responsibility is setting up the meeting and managing the logistics, usually more of kind of a tech master role in the virtual meeting setup. And it's usually also their responsibility to introduce the Toastmaster of the day. Not every club does this, but sometimes the clubs do, where the sergeant at arms is essentially the person in the beginning of an event in our, the before times, that they would be the ones reminding you to turn off your cell phones, telling you to quiet down, find your seats, kind of just wrangling everyone before the big man or like the big woman is here to truly get things started. So that's also the case for a Toastmasters meeting, but we have a little less wrangling to do typically. And so that's what the sergeant at arms is in their role.
I've also seen the sergeant at arms remind people to mute themselves. My cat's being quiet right now, but a lot of times she comes in and she's crying. And so I have seen the sergeant at arms just provide the general meeting etiquette for being on Zoom. I think that's one of the great things, and just giving people an overview of how to use the Zoom controls. Granted, we've been on Zoom for a while, but it never fails to just go over what is our etiquette and what are our standards for the meeting.
All right. Oh yeah,
Danielle,
Larry, go ahead.
I just had another thought on Megan's question. I don't know if all clubs do it, but if the roles are assigned out a week or two in advance, which is what our club tries to do, then you'd know who your evaluator is, and you could certainly contact them outside of the club or ahead of time, or give them your evaluation forms and let them know specifically, what it is what you want to be evaluated on specifically, in addition to what the form requires.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great idea. And Megan too, although it could be cheating a little bit on your club, you're always welcome to visit another club perhaps. And at the very least, then when you come back and you are a general evaluator and giving suggestions, you can say, I saw at this club that they were doing it like this and presenting this kind of feedback. And then people can be a little more receptive. Or you can always consider, joining a club that's a little harsher and find people who are mean to each other. Maybe that should be a whole theme for a club. I don't know. Maybe it's mine. Something to consider. Hopefully this gives you some ideas, but of course you're welcome to keep us posted. And if you're still struggling or want more ideas, you can always reach out to Julie and me after the fact. With that, I want to jump right in so we can carry on with our workshop and do some Pathways tutorial. So what I'm going to do is pull up Pathways on my browser. But what I would love for you to do is to also pull up Toastmasters.org on your computer so that you can follow along. If you feel like this is too technically challenging, or you just don't feel like it, or you don't have, well, you have internet because you're here. I don't know if there's some other reason that you don't want to, that's totally fine. I can share my screen and you can just watch me do the thing. But I think it's most helpful if you kind of have me sharing my screen over here, but then you can swipe over to your own browser and follow along and go through the steps just to make sure that you know exactly how to do what I'm doing. So with that, I'll give you guys a minute to pull that up and I'll pull it up on mine. And I will share. All right. So you all can now see my screen for those of you who are looking. No one responded, but I'm assuming we're good. If you want to throw a thumbs up. Just make sure technically, okay, cool. Saw some thumbs up. Thank you so much. All right, so here we are at Toastmasters.org. Obviously, the first thing that we'll need to do is log in. So if you're not already logged in automatically, all you have to do is click up here at the navigation on login. And you cross your fingers, hoping you remember your password. All right, there we go. We're logged in. So once we're logged in, you can see up here in the navigation, there is pathways right up here. And this is where you can both look at your paths for options if you want to choose your path, and you can go straight to your curriculum from here. So I just want to point out that this navigation menu is going to be your home base. It's where you're going to access everything. We're going to start from the very beginning, like you've never touched pathways, never even seen the word before in your life. And we're going to go to learn more. And once we're on learn more, this is just an all about pathways overview. And if you go to paths and projects, obviously you can read all of this on your own time. But once you click paths and projects, this is going to give you the list of paths that are available to you. Now, I bring this to your attention, not so that you can go down a research rabbit hole and read about all 11 path options and feel overwhelmed by having to decide between them. I bring this up because if, for instance, you saw this and you wanted to be a stand-up comedian and you saw, hey, look at this engaging humor path. I want to do that one. It's the perfect fit. I don't need to do any other considerations. Then this is a perfect place for you to explore. Also, if you decide to take the quiz or the assessment to get some recommendations, you may see that they recommend dynamic leadership, let's say, and leadership development. And you're wondering, well, what actually is the difference between them? How do I know which one to pick? You can come here, and if you select one of these, like dynamic leadership, you can learn more about that path by clicking on it. And this will show you the projects that are involved in that path. So if you wanted to compare them, then you can. I just backspace so we could get to the overview. I just want you to know that this is here. We won't go through all 11 right now, but it can be really helpful as you're deciding which path to choose. Next, let's go back up to our menu at the top here, and let's say choose a path. So let's say you didn't want the engaging humor one. All of the others kind of sound the same and you're confused, and you just want Toastmasters to tell you a path you should do. Well, fortunately, they created a tool to do exactly that. So you can say continue to path selection here. For you, if this is your first path you've ever chosen, it should be free. For me, it says $20 because I already have some and it wants me to pay extra for extra curriculum. So don't be scared by that. Then we say, choose a path, select your preferences. Here you do have the option of selecting printed materials if you really are passionate about that. And it does cost $25 just for the actual printed materials and shipping to get to you. But probably you're going to select digital resources, which is free and included with your membership. And then look familiar, those little icons. You can view all of the path options. And if you thought, I wanted engaging humor, I don't need to look at any other ones, that's where you can go. You can just click engaging humor and never look at it again. If you want Toastmasters to tell you what to take, you click Take Assessment. As soon as I hit continue, it's going to take you through a series of questions you'll respond to about your goals, what you hope to accomplish in Toastmasters, what you feel like your strengths and weaknesses are. And at the end, it's going to give you their top recommendations of paths. Now, when I did it, I know that it at least gave me a top 3 and it gave me a number 1 choice. So if you want to do as little thinking as possible, you can take the assessment, choose number 1, and you're done. You don't have to think about it again until you dive into the curriculum. If you want to consider, again, this is where I brought up, if it's recommending dynamic leadership and leadership development and team collaboration, they're all kind of sounding the same just from the name, you can go back to that page just about the different pathways and compare the projects to see what seems like a better fit for you. And then if it's still too hard to decide, just go with your number 1. Any questions so far on the assessment, choosing a path part of the process? And I ask now because then we're going to jump into actually looking at the curriculum. So I want to make sure I'm not going too fast or skipping ahead. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I'll give it like another 30 seconds or so, just in case you're typing. Julie, we need to prepare the Jeopardy music for next time.
Yes. I saw a question. Can you retake the assessment?
That's a great question. Considering it's letting me do it right now, I would say yes, because I have taken it before and it's letting me click it. I don't know what the stipulations are for that. For instance, maybe it's because I already completed my path, so it knows that I'm selecting a brand new one. If you want to replace your current path with a different one because you just started it and you're like, no, I clicked humor on accident, I don't want to do anything to do with that, please give me a different one. That's something that can be arranged, and you just have to reach out to the Toastmasters support and they'll help you take care of that. But taking the assessment, I think there's no problem retaking it.
Yeah, I think you can take it as many times as you want, because Toastmasters International always will let you work on additional paths. So I'm pretty sure that you can take it. And I do know that, from time to time, your recommendations can change because we all have different priorities based on the day.
All right, since I'm not seeing any other questions, we will jump into now just the how to navigate pathways or how to use your curriculum that it is providing for you. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this workshop, one of the things I want to make sure we're drilling down here is all of the jargon that we have for pathways and for Toastmasters as a whole, because it's a lot of words that we never use in any other part of our lives. So I want to make sure that we're clear about it. So for pathways, you're going to hear a couple of different phrases. And just in the menu, we have them here. We have pathways, we have Basecamp, and we have the navigator. So pathways is what the actual curriculum program is called. That is the Pathways learning experience. It is the education module that Toastmasters use to help you succeed. Now, Basecamp is the platform name. So that's actually what's hosting the online curriculum. So I like to consider Pathways, or the path that you choose, like an independent study online course. And Basecamp is just the actual platform where the course is hosted. That's where you have the resources, that's where you have the videos to watch and all the curriculum, but Pathways is still the biggest umbrella. And then this last one, the navigator, that's essentially just the tutorial module to help guide you through pathways. So that is a great resource. Once everything I've said here, you completely forget in 48 hours, you can go to the navigator and see if it has the questions that you might have as they come up as you're interacting with pathways. So, like I mentioned, since Basecamp is the platform where our paths are hosted, I want to click Go to Basecamp. This takes you to that same screen that we saw before when we were choosing our path and continuing to path selection, but instead this time I want to say Go to Basecamp. And remember, make sure you're logged in. If you're already logged in, it will go no problem. If you weren't logged in, it'll make you log in before you go. So just make sure all those bases are covered. All right, now you probably will come to a screen like this. It might have opened in a new tab, might have opened in a new window. Sometimes if it opens a new window, it comes up really tiny and you're like, what am I even looking at? Just make sure you zoom it out so you can see everything, all of Pathways in all its glory. Here, you don't actually have to disable the pop-up blocker. I never do. I always just click the little X and I go about my business. And there are ways around this if you are really particular. However, if you do want to disable the pop-up blocker, then it will easily open things up in the pop-ups as it wants to. But I just don't want this to scare you away. Once we click that little X, here we are. Here is your homepage in Basecamp for your Pathways program. Now, there are a couple of places that you'll want to be aware of. which are these top 3 panels. That's where they want to navigate to. The education transcript, that's going to be the thing you click the most. That is where you will go to look at your curriculum, access all the materials, watch the videos, all of that good stuff. But here, speech evaluations, this is really helpful because as I think it was Larry who said something about making sure you talk to your evaluator ahead of time and go over the evaluation guide for your project. This speech evaluations panel, that's where you want to go to get those evaluation guides. You don't have to go back to your transcript every time you need to have an evaluation guide ready for your evaluator. So this is a really helpful place to navigate to. And then lastly, tutorials and resources. This has tutorials like the Navigator, along with some other resources that you might want down the road. Now we will go to Paths and Learning Education Transcript. And if you are brand new, you would only have one thing in here, plus maybe the Navigator, and it should be your path, which mine was not showing up, sorry, because I completed them. But it would show up like this with the little stack of books icon, and you would have your path name here. So I'll go ahead into dynamic leadership. And typically you want to click open curriculum, but in case you don't and you click the name, I just want to show you how to get to the same place. If you click the name, dynamic leadership, or the name of your path, it's going to give you this overview and you're going to be like, what are all these trainings? I'm so confused. What's happening? That's where you just click open curriculum over here. That's the same button you want. It's the same button you want to click every time. Open curriculum, it should take you straight to level 1. Here I have all these checkboxes and 100% because I did all of this already. For you, it should be 0%, not because you're a failure, but just because you haven't started. And isn't that a good outlook? So you would start here with the icebreaker project. This, like I mentioned earlier, is the first project every path has. So every path, no matter what you do, you're going to start with this icebreaker project. And all it is, it's very simple. It's a 4 to 6 minute speech where you introduce yourself to the club. After this, there should be some repeating projects. These should look familiar no matter what path you choose. And it's in the later levels where things get a little bit more custom and tailored to your path. So this should look familiar no matter what path you're in, and you just move through them. And I will launch a project just so you can take a look. So like I mentioned, I don't disable my pop-up blockers, so that's why I get this screen. And then I say click here, and it opens just fine. I hope your guys' isn't taking as long to load as mine is. All right. Now mine loaded where I left off, which is at the your evaluation screen. Yours will probably not do this. So let me go back. This is where yours should start. And all you do is click the little arrows and move through the project. It will have things for you to read, quizzes for you to take, things for you to interact with, videos to watch, etc., all built into this slideshow style course. And then I just want to point out a couple of things down here in this drop-down menu. This is essentially your table of contents. So if you want to go back to a certain section, or like me, I'm going into this project later after I've finished it, but I want to navigate to a couple spots just to show you. And you can go to, sorry, I just want to make sure I have the right section. If you go to the Your Evaluation section, which you don't have to navigate to right now, I just want you to be aware of it. This is where you get your evaluation resource And then there's also this really helpful thing called Print My Project. And this gives you an entire PDF version of your course or of your project. And it gives you the evaluation resource, any additional resources like this outline worksheet, for example, and anything else associated with your project. It just puts it in one nice PDF for you to reference later on. I personally love this, which is why I always bring it up, because I save these PDFs to my computer for every project so that I don't have to open Basecamp every single time I want to remember what my project is or reference something or use the evaluation guide or whatever it is. So I always make sure I bring this up. Then there are a couple of things I want you to note, which are the assess your skills before and the assess your skills after. These are both quizzes that you will take. I don't know if quizzes are the right word. It's more like a survey that you take to assess yourself, assess your skills. I mean, it says it right there. You assess yourself before you do the project and rating yourself on a scale from 1 to 5 in a few different categories. And then you take the exact same assessment after you've completed the project. And once you've completed the assess your skills after, that is what marks this project as complete. So that's why I bring it up, because that is how I got this little check mark on this project. Once you scroll through all the slides, you do all the work, you do your speech, and you come in here and you try to assess yourself on how you did with this project. And once you hit that last slide, that's what gives you the check mark that says it's been completed. Once you have all of these check marks, I just want to point out that there's this little project down here called Level 1 Completion. Each level will have one of these, and it will do the same thing on my screen. Obviously, it's already checked, so it says View Certificate. That's not helpful to you at all. Yours probably says Activate or Launch or one of those funky verbs, and you'll click it, and you'll click it again, and then you might even click it a third time. And all that really is submitting a level completion request to your Vice President of Education so that they can then go in on their side on Basecamp to confirm, yes, the student in fact did do all of these projects and gave 4 speeches and did such and such. They have in fact completed this level. So that is how you get that check mark. Now, obviously, you can navigate here between the levels. You can go and check out all your projects. In levels 3, 4, and 5, you have cool things called electives, and you can, in fact, launch and look at as many electives as you want, and it doesn't matter. It won't cost you anything. You won't do anything. You can do all the electives if you really want. But you just need whatever the minimum required is for each level. And once you complete those and get your check mark, then you're good to go on each of those levels.
And one thing to keep in mind, once you do finish your level, make sure your Vice President of Education submits it in Club Central. It needs to be approved in Basecamp and then submitted in Club Central, because that's how your club actually gets the credit. You need both. It's a little funky, but do make sure that your Vice President of Education is submitting them, and you'll get an email from Toastmasters International congratulating you, and that's how you'll know that it was actually submitted in Club Central as well.
Yeah. And if you don't know what those words mean, then just say them to your Vice President of Education, and they will know what you mean, and that's what matters. All right. Before I navigate,
Danielle?
yes.
Since you mentioned, can you just clarify what the distinctions are between the electives and the minimum requirements as far as the nature, scope of them, or intent of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see in levels 3, 4, and 5 for me, for dynamic leadership, I have one project here that's by its lonesome, and then I have my elective projects. So these projects in here are going to vary per path. So this is specific to dynamic leadership. In order to move forward in this path, I need to negotiate the best outcome and fulfill that project. But the elective projects typically are the same across the board for all of the paths. There may be a little bit of variation on a few of them. And you just pick whatever the minimum requirement is. And these are a little bit more in-depth and have a little bit more, I guess, freedom for creativity. So for instance, that project on negotiating the best outcome, it was, as it sounds, about negotiation. I had to explain about a negotiation that I experienced, or I had to give an overview of a potential negotiation in the future, and that was the focus. But this is a lot more open-ended. You see something like inspire your audience. That could be anything. That could be practicing a keynote speech. That could be practicing a toast for a wedding. That could be trying to be a motivational speaker and practicing your material in your Toastmasters Club meeting. It could be anything that you want it to be. And a lot of these that can apply using descriptive language. Again, that can be used in a wide variety of ways. So these are trying to get you to practice skills as opposed to learning a specific I guess, characteristic of your path, let's say. And then I want to go to, these were level 3 electives, but I just want to jump to some level 5 electives so you can see the difference. Some level 5 electives, again, are a little bit more intensive. They're things like moderate a panel discussion or the high performance leadership project. These involved a lot more time and energy devoted to them than the typical projects, which are just to give a 5 to 7 minute speech and get evaluated on it. Usually these involve days, weeks, even months, depending on how intense you are about it, of work and energy and planning in order to fulfill the project, as opposed to a simple, 1 week turnaround. I'll just take a look at level 4. And obviously you guys can be doing the same, looking at your elective options. Level 4 electives I find are really fun because there are things like create a podcast, write a compelling blog, gets you to get out of your comfort zone a little bit. And a lot of these things, you just have to do them in trial, I would say. For instance, the create a podcast, you need to do 3 episodes and that's it. You don't have to make it into a full thing and do a podcast forever till the end of eternity. You can just give it a go, do a few episodes, and if you don't like it, you don't have to keep doing it.
I will say Danielle has an awesome podcast, though. Would you like to share your podcast with everyone?
Sure. Yes. I think it's fun to talk about the podcast project because I do co-host a podcast that all started because of this very project. My co-host is also a Toastmaster and was actually district director last year. And she and I started a podcast together called Currently Obsessed. And we just talk about all the things that we're obsessed with because that's who we are. It's a good time.
So you never know where your Pathways project is going to lead.
All right, so before I move on to just a couple other areas of Basecamp that we talked about earlier, are there any other questions just about navigating the curriculum here, going between the levels, activating projects, things like that?
2 questions. One, where can we find your podcast, which is and then secondly, all the little in red where it says find your project and everything, those are all active links. My computer will not open any of them. And so I'll have to find a computer person to help solve that. So
interesting.
They won't open.
Yes, there should be active links. So I'm sorry to hear that. On that page, I know one of them is the evaluation resource. We'll go to another section in a bit that has those guides, and we'll see if maybe those links work for you. But the other ones, yeah, I'm not sure. We'll have to troubleshoot it.
Yeah, project checklist, none of those activate. So that's
Okay.
another.
Okay.
Thank you.
Interesting. Thanks for letting me know. And then my podcast, you can listen anywhere you get podcasts. It's on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, all those places. If you're not sick of hearing my voice after tonight, you can go there.
We're never sick of hearing you, Danielle.
We're currently obsessed with your voice, Danielle, actually.
Oh, wow. Making me blush, Larry. All right. Any other questions just about navigating, going through pathways or through base camp here on the levels? No? Great. You guys are pathways masters now, is what I'm hearing with the silence. That's what the silence tells me.
Yeah, I do have a question. So like whenever you're ready to do a presentation on a particular pathway, like do you notify the president or the Toastmaster so they can work you in, or do you just wait until they say like, hey, you're on the docket to give a speech to support your pathway? Like how does that part work?
Yeah, so it kind of varies between clubs, but I would say once you're ready and you've worked through one of the projects, absolutely reach out to either the Toastmaster of an upcoming week or reach out to your Vice President of Education. The Vice President of Education is usually responsible for creating those agendas and planning people in advance. So you can reach out to them and say, hey, I'd really love it to give a speech on this day, and tell them what your project is, and they can work you into the schedule if they haven't already put you in the queue, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right, if any other questions come up, by all means, post them in the chat and I can always answer them later. But I'll just run through a couple of the other places that we mentioned. One of them is our speech evaluations. So once we go here, we have a couple of FAQs here, and then we have evaluation resources. This is based on the project titles. So make sure that you know which project you're looking for. Let's say this was the icebreaker project, for instance, since everyone has that. We just go right down here to icebreaker. Voila. And I believe we can just hit launch. And there is your PDF. Judy, did this version work for you?
I was able to get to some of the evaluations, yes.
Okay. And did they open the PDF?
I could not tell you that. I don't know for sure. I know I filled them out. I was unable to send it to the recipient for whom I had evaluated.
Okay. Okay. I see. All right. You should be able to download those and email those. But for all of the projects, you can access the evaluation resources here. And again, I just find this a really helpful place so that you don't have to go digging into your levels to go get that evaluation guide. If, for instance, you prepped your icebreaker, 2 weeks ahead of when you're actually giving it, and then the morning of, you're realizing, oh my gosh, I never sent my evaluator that one sheet where it has all the questions they need to answer. You can just go right here, download it, send it to your evaluator, no problem. And you can always come back to them. And then the last place we'll go is just tutorials and resources so that you can see what's here. So this is like a more in-depth archive of all of the resources available to you. So that is why you see this 360-degree evaluation resource. And then it's in a bunch of different languages too. So you'll also find the evaluation resources here. If you see this subject filter, if I just want to look for some evaluation resources in English, this is another place to find them. If you just want to find project descriptions and you want to come here. And then there are also some other resource documents. For instance, on that icebreaker project, we saw the speech outline worksheet, I believe. That would be one of these resource documents. Any extra resource that is included with some of these projects. If for some reason you just didn't download it, you lost track of it on your computer or something, and you just need that one evaluation guide or that one worksheet or whatever it is, you can just go here to find it. And then of course, there are some tutorials, which is a place for you to explore another day. All right. Any other questions about Pathways Basecamp? We went over how to choose a path, how to decide between paths if you need to debate which one to choose. We talked about taking the assessment so that Toastmasters can essentially choose a path for you and make recommendations. We also looked at accessing Basecamp, navigating the curriculum in the Basecamp platform, and looking at evaluation resources and other project resources within Basecamp. Anything else? Anything else that you tried to do and for some reason you could not?
Danielle, I have a question.
Yeah.
In regards to the evaluations, it mentioned that you have an electronic evaluation as well as a written one. When you're doing, per se, icebreaker, I'm going to be doing that one. So my other team members are going to evaluate me on that speech, and then they're going to share written evaluation as well as an electronic one in the app. And it will be able to be seen by me in my area, right?
So that's a great question. I can definitely clarify that. So for the app, that only applies to the grammarian, timer, and counter roles. So any feedback they want to leave for you that typically wouldn't be given in the evaluator role, that can be done in the app, and you can track it there, and you can look at what people have said about you in that app. For the actual evaluation, like you mentioned, of an icebreaker, that's separate and would be kept either to the worksheet, or if they wanted to give you, like an email with some feedback. A lot of people do email follow-ups. They can include feedback that way. But the evaluation resource with your project is what your evaluator should fill out and complete, and then send you that filled in PDF after you've done your speech. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, because that was leading me to, I guess, storage of all that material within our areas, right? I guess how all of that is actually stored, and how long does it stay there?
Yeah, so there is this section on Basecamp called My Documents. So anytime you receive a filled in feedback form, you can absolutely just upload it here so that it stays stored here. So that way you don't have to go digging through emails, and you can keep it in one place. And then when you're looking at your own profile, anytime you come to this ePortfolio tab, that's where all of your documents are stored. So is that a helpful option for you?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All
And
right.
then one more question.
Yeah.
One of the participants here mentioned, I guess, contest. Is that part of the learning paths, or is that something separate? Does
It's
that
a little bit separate. So every year, Toastmasters International hosts the World Championship of Public Speaking. It starts at the club level and it advances through area, division, district, and then quarterfinals. The basis of it is it's a little bit different than Pathways, because you, in theory, wouldn't get credit in your Pathways. Now, of course, you could deliver a speech and you could have somebody evaluate it on the side, and you could get credit that way, but it is a little bit different than pathways. And for those, you can talk about anything you want. There will be an international speech contest, which will go on to the World Championship of Public Speaking. And then just to make it even more confusing, we have a humorous contest as well that will end at the district level. They're a little bit different. They're really fun. It's a great opportunity to put yourself out there and speak in front of a new audience, but it is a little bit different than the pathways.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
That's all for me.
Thank you so much. Those are all great questions. Really appreciate that. Any other questions? I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so I can see all of your faces. Any other questions about pathways, base camp, anything Toastmasters related? We are pretty much wrapped up for what I had prepared to cover with you all. So if something did not get answered, now is the time to bring it up.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. I really hope this was helpful. I hope that it set you on the right path and you feel confident going into your next meeting and tackling pathways and all of that good stuff.